Why are you, a complete stranger, staying in our house for so long? My sister-in-law, Rachel, yelled at me, clearly upset. After losing my dear husband, I stayed with my in-laws. Was that not allowed? I never thought you'd be like this. You should leave right now. Even my normally kind mother-in-law, Grace, started criticizing me harshly. If it were like that, I would leave on my own. I screamed inside my head, but I held it in. I understand, I said quietly, plotting my revenge. My name is Lily, and I'm 40 years old. I work as an elementary school teacher. My husband, John, was also a teacher at a different school, and he was 42. That year, we had been married for 12 years. We met at my first job right after college, and John, 2 years older than me, was a dependable colleague who taught me a lot. We became close through work, eventually getting married. I loved working with kids and became a teacher for that reason, but sadly, we never had any children. My father-in-law passed away when John was in his 50s, before we got married, and John lived with his mother until I joined the family. Thanks to the inheritance from his father, Grace had a comfortable financial situation. Since the beginning of our marriage, we had agreed to send $2,000 a month to Grace. We had a dream to fulfill, even though we needed to save money for it. We always sent money to Grace for her expenses, utilities, food, and a small rent, as part of our duty. We kept working as teachers while worrying more about the rising number of children skipping school. Our dream was to open a learning center for those kids. John's older sister, Kate, who is 3 years older than him, is married and lives far away. She has a son, but he left for college last spring, so it's just Kate and her husband now. Even though they lived about an hour away, Kate visited every weekend, asking Grace for financial help. My son's tuition is short, can you help out a bit? Kate would ask in a soft voice. Well, it can't be helped. How much do you need? Grace would spoil Kate for some reason. John couldn't understand it, and one day, he asked his sister, "You got a fair share of Dad's inheritance, right? Why are you always short on money?" Kate replied, "You wouldn't understand. Raising kids is so expensive. The inheritance is running out, so I need help." However, Kate's spending was clearly excessive, even to me. She'd ask for money for school, home repairs, and even food. Every time, Grace would give her a large amount. I didn't get why. One day, we went to work like usual. Everything was normal, until the phone call. I was told that John had collapsed and been rushed to the hospital. "Hurry, it's urgent," I cried in shock. "What, John collapsed?" I was confused, but when I got to the hospital, I found John unconscious and needing serious treatment. I hoped it was just a nightmare, but despite everything, John passed away that night. I was in shock and didn't have time to cry. I took time off work to plan the funeral, feeling like I wouldn't survive mentally without doing something. Grace, though probably even more heartbroken than I was, kindly greeted the mourners. During the funeral, I had the chance to reconnect with my sister, Emma, and her family, Emma, her husband Luke, and their son Noah, who was in college, who helped a lot. But Kate didn't seem sad at all about her brother's death. It almost looked like she was relieved. After John's funeral, I went back to Grace's house. Kate's family didn't come by, they said they were busy. Then Grace spoke softly. "Lily, I never knew losing my son would be this lonely." Hearing that, all my sadness came pouring out, and I broke down crying. "If it's okay with you, would you stay here forever? I don't want to be alone," Grace asked kindly. "Let's take care of each other from now on, Mom," I said, wiping my tears. But more troubles came. Just as we decided to live together, Grace suddenly collapsed. It might have been the shock of losing John. She had a stroke. Thankfully, she survived but was left with paralysis on her right side. Grace, using a cane, said she wanted to stay in her house. "There are so many memories here. I want to stay here," she said, though her speech was a bit slurred. "I'm fine, Lily, you should continue your work," Grace told me gently, but I worried about leaving her alone. So we decided to hire someone for home care with the help of long-term care insurance. I kept sending $2,000 a month to help with her care. But then, Kate started visiting more often. "I'm just worried about Mom," Kate said, but I had learned not to trust her by then. Grace, feeling weak and struggling with her mobility, asked, "Lily, Kate wants to live here with us. What do you think?" "Kate wants to?" I asked in surprise. "What about her husband?" "Noah's in college now, and she says it's fine for her to live here alone. Her husband might join us later," Grace explained. I felt uneasy and asked, "If you think it's okay, I won't stop it, but what about me?" "What are you saying, Lily? You're like a daughter to me." "Of course, you're welcome here," Grace assured me. However, if my sister-in-law really moved into the house, I wouldn't be able to stop her like John did. This left me feeling very anxious and uncertain. With these worries in mind, I had to leave the house for a week-long training, so I left Grace's care to the helper. "Mom, I'll be away for a week starting tomorrow. so please listen to the helper, I said, trying to sound cheerful to calm Grace's worries. Don't give money to Kate if she comes by, and if anything feels strange, contact her husband. I was so worried Kate might show up while I was gone, I couldn't focus on my training because of these concerns. When I came home a week later, I was greeted by my sister-in-law. Welcome back, Mom wants to talk to you, Kate said with a smug look. I immediately felt something wasn't right. When I walked into the living room, Grace looked at me with a disapproving expression. I'm back, I said quietly, feeling the tense atmosphere. Lily, were you planning to send me away and put me in a facility? Grace suddenly shouted at me, angry. Confused, Kate added, remember what you said before, Lily? You said, I want to put Mom in a facility, I can't take care of her anymore, didn't you? She spoke as if I had actually said that. It's fine, since you're just a stranger anyway, I'll take care of Mom from now on, you don't need to be here anymore, Kate said, her face cold and harsh. Grace was also furious, glaring at me and yelling, I can't believe this, you're a burden, just leave. Okay, I'll leave. With no energy to argue, I held back my tears and started packing. I left behind the things that reminded me of John, taking only what I needed and walking out the door. Thank you for everything, I said at the door, but Kate, eager to get rid of me, replied, are you still here? Just leave already. A mix of sadness and frustration filled my heart. Kicked out of the house, I went back to my parents' place without telling them first. What happened, Lily? What's with all the bags? My mom asked, shocked by my sudden return. I'm sorry for showing up like this, but I don't want to talk about it right now. I'll go to work from here, so please let me be for a while. The room I used to stay in at my parents' house was now empty. I placed my bags on the floor and stared up at the ceiling, lost in thought. What was Kate planning to do with her family? Grace had mentioned that Luke might eventually move in, but I never got the sense that Kate had any such plans. I wanted to convince myself that it wasn't my problem anymore, but I couldn't stop thinking about Grace. Then something came to mind. The day before John collapsed, he had tried to tell me something and was about to give me an envelope, but his mom called him away, and I never got to find out what was inside. Could it have been a will? I felt uneasy. I opened the envelope carefully to see what was inside. What I found shocked me. The next day, I went to work, reported my training to the principal, and went about my duties as if everything was normal. Excuse me, I'm heading home now, I said to a colleague. You must be exhausted from the training, and I'm sure it's tough with the loss of John. Take care of yourself, she said sympathetically. But the reason I was rushing home wasn't just because I was tired or still grieving. I needed to talk to Luke and figure out what Kate was planning. I didn't want to have a serious conversation in a public place, so I sent Luke an email asking if we could meet in person. I've got something to talk about with my wife too, Luke replied right away. When I got home, I locked myself in my room and called Luke. He picked up quickly, as though he had been waiting for me. I'm glad you called, Lily, I was just about to contact you, Luke said with a relieved tone. I explained the situation about Kate staying at Grace's house and the lies she had been spreading. I told him how she had accused me of trying to send Grace to a nursing home and take over the house, which led to me being kicked out. Really? Where are you now? Luke asked, surprised. I told him I was at my parents' house and gave him the full story of what had happened since the funeral. I'm so sorry about that, he said sincerely. It's not your fault, Luke, I replied. Kate had always been reckless with money, and it seemed worse since her son Noah went to college. Wait, Kate was getting money from Grace? What happened to it? Luke asked. I knew Grace had been giving Kate a lot of money, but I thought Luke was aware of it. I've never heard about that. I've been paying for Noah's tuition, and our finances have always been tight, Luke said, sounding shocked. Actually, I have a request. Could you come to my parents' house next Sunday? I asked. I felt a little bold making this request, but I needed his help. Their house was about 30 minutes from my parents' place and on the way to Grace's. Sure, I was planning to meet you first, then head to Grace's house together, Luke agreed. After the call ended, I received a phone call from Grace's house. I was surprised it was so soon after everything that had happened. Hey, you took money without asking, didn't you? Give it back right now, Kate yelled. What are you talking about? I haven't taken any money, I responded, completely confused. I checked Mom's bank account, and the balance was way too low. What did you spend it on? Kate pressed. But I hadn't taken any money. I had been too busy with Grace's care to deposit the usual $2,000, but I hadn't withdrawn any funds without permission. I think there's been a misunderstanding, I replied firmly. Kate didn't seem convinced and raised her voice. Come over on Sunday, we'll sort this out. That actually worked out for me, so I said, okay, let's talk about this in front of Grace, and hung up. On Sunday, Luke showed up earlier than expected. Oh, it's you? My mom said, surprised. Yes, he's Kate's husband. Mom, you've met him before, right? I explained. My mom didn't remember at first, but then she did. Oh, yes, I remember now. Once she recognized him, I explained. Actually, I wanted to talk to him about some family matters. After leading Luke into the living room and briefly greeting him, I pulled out the envelope. I need you to look at this. Inside the envelope were several photos and a report. As I spread them out in front of Luke, he gasped in surprise. What is this? Luke asked, his eyes widening at the photos. The pictures showed Kate at a nightclub with a young man, heading to a hotel. The report from a detective agency outlined her excessive spending. Arthur entrusted this to me before he passed away. He had suspicions about Kate's spending and hired an investigator. He wanted to talk to me about it, but he died before we could, I explained. Luke looked at the photos in shock and anger. I always thought she was leaving the house a lot, but I never imagined this, he said, his voice heavy with disbelief. Lily, we need to do something about this. We can't ignore it. I had already decided to confront Kate, so I nodded in agreement. 30 minutes later, we arrived at my mother-in-law's house and rang the doorbell. It's Lily, I'm here as promised, I called out. We heard Kate's annoyed voice from inside. How long are you going to make me wait? She unlocked the door and opened it. Come in, she said, but when she saw Luke, she tried to close the door. Luke quickly stopped her, gripping the doorknob. Kate, we need to talk. Just a moment, Luke said, his voice steady but filled with anger. Kate tried to push the door shut, but she couldn't overpower Luke. She reluctantly left it open. Fine, what do you want? Kate said, not wanting her mother to hear Luke's unexpected visit. Luke pulled out the photos and asked, Is that you in these? Who's the man with you? Kate was stunned. Where did you get these? No way. Who is this man? Answer me, Luke insisted, his patience running thin. Just a friend. Can't I have young friends? Kate shot back defensively. Stop lying, Luke shouted. I know everything. Why? Who told you? Kate muttered, realizing she couldn't keep up the lies. Luke calmly replied, Arthur suspected your spending and had it investigated. You were taking money from your mother and blowing it at nightclubs. I know the whole story, Luke continued, his anger barely contained. How are we supposed to pay for Noah's tuition when you're draining all our resources? You really think you can keep asking for more money? Luke's voice was full of rage. Enough, he snapped. I don't care anymore. We're getting a divorce. What? Kate gasped, stunned. You heard me. We're getting a divorce. I'll send you the papers. Fill them out and send them back, Luke said, his tone final. Kate sank into a chair, defeated. Soon after, Luke and Kate started the divorce process through a lawyer, and it was finalized. They agreed that Kate's reckless spending at the nightclubs would be considered in the divorce settlement. They also decided that Noah's tuition payments would continue to be shared until his graduation. However, given Kate's history, they made arrangements for the lawyer to collect the payments each month. After receiving her inheritance from her father, Kate had spent it all on nightclubs and tried to get money from my mother-in-law. When she found the bank account nearly empty, her plan fell apart. It turned out that the money Arthur and I had been giving my mother-in-law had mostly been used for her living expenses and to cover Kate's demands, leaving no savings behind. Since my mother-in-law's house was in her name, there was no money left for Kate unless the house was sold. I later learned from the caregiver that Kate, realizing her plans had failed, abandoned my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law continued to live modestly with the caregiver's help.